What is today Latin America was once many native nations. Spain, Portugal, France, England, and the Dutch and Danish all invaded. They carried out genocide after genocide and enslaved both natives and Africans. After independence, most new governments were still white-dominated, with more genocides against natives in nations like Argentina, Brazil, and Chile. European powers hold on to some territories even today and kept invading to take their colonies back. The United States invaded too, overthrowing or trying to overthrow over 60 governments, the last attempt in the year 2020 in Venezuela. The U.S. also took half of Mexico's land and a tenth of its people, then Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands. There is a long history of many Americans fearing and hating Latinos. Latin America's image and reality is often one of instability, poverty, drug cartels, revolutions, corruption, and refugees. But it did not have to be this way. Latin America could remain all or mostly native nations. I spoke about this in detail in the previous series, What If Natives Won? Poverty, white domination, and foreign invasions could have been stopped, prevented, or limited. The U.S. could have been more Latino culturally, with higher numbers of Latinos. The U.S. could have been less racist, less dominating, or the U.S. could be defeated. Some Latin American nations could even become regional or world powers. There is a huge lack of alternate history about Latin America and Latinos. So much alternate history is Europe-centered, mostly because so much history and history teaching is Europe-centered. This series is dedicated to scenarios, points of departure, and possibilities of Latin American victory within Latin America, and a more Latino or less racist American society. My name is Carroll. I'm Associate Professor of History at Northern Virginia Community College. I've written mostly about wars, veterans, human rights, and genocide. My next history book will be Genocide Denial in America, about the 7 genocides against indigenous people that took place in the U.S. that most people were never taught about, don't know, or deny. I've also written some science fiction, mostly alternate history. One story, Timely Saviors, appeared in a short story collection, The Witness Paradox. I'm also, together with Rob Schmidt of Bluecorn Comics, editing and putting out a short story alternate history collection, What If Natives Won? I've also written a sci-fi alternate history book, The Man in Black, the first of a series. There have long been many proposals to break up Texas into multiple states. Contrary to Texas nationalist and Texas exceptionalist myth, there's no reason this couldn't be done easily. Texas borders were entirely arbitrary, and Texas identity has always been something recent, and it isn't even that strong anymore, less than a fifth of the people in the state. Most people in Texas care little about identity as Texans, even compared to what their parents felt or thought. Basically, Texas nationalism and secession sentiment, or independence groups, exist only in tiny fringe groups, often bigots, as supposed humorous cartoons like this show. The biggest reason why Texas could easily be broken up is that there is a huge gap between what the would-be Republic of Texas claimed and what it actually controlled. The striped area is what the would-be Republic actually had any kind of control over, and then only sometimes. Texas never had any power over what is today South or West Texas. As you can see, more than half of the ridiculous territorial claims were taken away, given to New Mexico, Colorado, and Oklahoma. There were other proposed divisions or boundaries for Texas after it was taken from Mexico in war by the U.S. that could have happened. Its recognizable panhandles could have been cut off. It could have been split in half, as Senator Bell proposed. There were also attempts to divide it in the 1910s and 1950s. But the strongest effort to break it up happened during Reconstruction. Huge parts of the state stayed loyal during the Civil War and never voted for or supported secession or other treason. This map showing the votes against secession don't reflect the huge amount of treason and terrorism aimed at American loyalists. There was a wave of violence, murders, bombings, beatings, and threats that dropped voter turnout by a third in the state. Most Tejanos, Mexicans born in Texas, also could either not vote or could only vote as part of corrupt political machines. They were concentrated in the south of the state, from San Antonio to the border, as well as around El Paso. In 1867 and 1869, Republicans in Congress proposed breaking Texas in two. The second attempt had the most support. As you can see, the new state would include not only the pro-Union loyalists before the war, most of them German Americans in the Central Hill Country. It would also include all the Tejanos in the south and west of the state. You would see a new state made up of more than half Mexicans, and most of the whites would be Germans. Germans in Texas were not just anti-slavery. They were generally anti-racist. Some married Mexicans. They signed the Treaty of Moisbach with Comanches, trying to avoid violence. It means in the 1860s you see a state controlled by minorities and anti-racist whites. Non-whites get and keep the vote, likely including blacks, former slaves. Blacks in Texas and in other parts of the South likely flee to this new state as a refuge. The remaining natives not on reservations, mostly Comanche, likely get a large reservation with less force used against them. Reconstruction would work in this new state, unlike in the rest of the South, where white supremacists regained control. And the new state's name? Lincoln was one proposal. The other was Matagorda, Spanish for heavy brush or vegetation. The new capital likely would be San Antonio. The capital of San Antonio Lincoln or San Antonio Matagorda. Its people would be called Lincolnians, Lincolnites, Matagordians, or Matagordianos. And as you can see, it'd be a blue state. It'd have at least 7 million people, 2 senators, and 9 congressmen today. A lot of close votes in Congress can turn out differently with 2 more progressive senators. For example, in 1991, the Senate almost stopped Bush Sr. from going to war in Iraq. Another effect would be cultural. Tejano music, a mix of German polka music played with accordions and tubas, later replaced by keyboards or synthesizers, is sung in Spanish but has Latin rhythms mixed in, and it would no longer be called Tejano. It would be Matagorda or Matagordiano instead, and it would be far less common in North Texas, what is just Texas in this timeline. There would also be far less violence against Texas Mexicans or Matagordianos or Lincolnites. No Texas Ranger atrocities, no Porvenir massacre, no Plan of San Diego ethnic cleansing, or even a reason for the uprising. This doesn't mean less police violence, but it's done by corrupt cops, not corrupt and racist cops. This is the end of the video. Please repost freely, like, quote, and comment. This has been Latin American Victory. Next time we will discuss, what if Bolivia stayed a larger nation?